put the barriers up right now. I don't care what he says. He doesn't own this bridge. That's what the HOA president told two men in orange vests on a Tuesday morning while they dragged concrete Jersey barriers across the approach to a bridge that sits on my property. I pulled up in my truck and just sat there for a moment watching. She saw me. She crossed her arms. She looked directly at me and did not move. She had hired these two men herself, apparently, to physically block the road to my land. Land I'd paid nearly $1 million for because she had decided the bridge between us was hers. Diane Pard had been president of that HOA for 9 years and was used to people backing down. What she didn't know was that I'd spent the last 3 weeks with a title attorney, a surveyor, and a structural engineer building a case that was airtight, and that the bridge she was blockading was specifically described in my recorded deed. I put the truck in park, pulled out my phone, started documenting. Tell me below, would you have moved those barriers yourself, or let her actions speak for the record? I should start at the beginning because none of this makes sense without it. My name is Garrett Weller. I'm 52 years old. I spent 26 years as a county road engineer in Middle Tennessee. The kind of job where you learn what land is worth, what deeds actually say, and why the difference between a recorded easement and a handshake agreement can cost somebody everything. I was good at the work. I liked it. Then my wife Carol got sick, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma stage 4. She fought for 2 years and she lost, and I lost with her. After Carol died, I did what a lot of men do when the bottom drops out. I worked. I kept going. I showed up, but at night, back in the house we'd bought together, with the garden she'd planted still growing without her. I couldn't breathe in there. So, I started thinking about land, not a subdivision, not a neighborhood with speed bumps and newsletters. Raw land, the kind you can drive across in first gear and not see another soul for an hour. About 18 months after Carol passed, I started making calls. A real estate attorney I'd known for years put me in touch with an estate broker handling the sale of the Bellamy family ranch, a working cattle spread that had been in the family since 1948. Old Calvin Bellamy had died at 91 with no direct heirs. His grandchildren, scattered across 4 states, wanted cash. The ranch was 5,000,200 acres of hardwood bottomland, rolling pasture and creek frontage along a bend in the Hatchie River in rural West Tennessee. The title description was 47 pages long, which most buyers would have found alarming. I found it interesting. I paid $940,000 for the whole parcel and closed in the spring. Now here's where I need to tell you about the bridge. When Calvin Bellamy was a younger man, sometime in the mid-1980s, a developer named Clint Ferris came sniffing around the edge of the Bellamy property. He wanted to build a private residential subdivision on a peninsula of elevated land that jutted into the river bend. Beautiful piece of ground. He negotiated with Calvin to use an old farm bridge, a single-lane concrete structure that Calvin's grandfather had built in 1941 as the road access to the new development. Calvin agreed verbally, the way rural Tennessee men of that generation did things. A handshake, a 6-pack of Budweiser, and a "you're welcome to use it, Clint." He never asked for money. He never recorded an easement. He just let Ferris use the bridge because it sat at the far edge of the property where nobody much cared. Ferris built his subdivision, sold 87 lots, called it Ridgemont Estates, built a gate at the near end of the bridge. The Ridgemont side put up a sign that said, "Private community, residents only," and the whole neighborhood just acted like they owned the bridge for 22 years. Nobody checked. Calvin didn't care. The HOA maintained the bridge in a minimal cosmetic way. They paved the approach. They repainted the guardrails. They voted on bridge matters and HOA meetings like it was theirs to vote on. What nobody did, not Ferris, not the HOA, not the 87 families living inside Ridgemont Estates, was go pull the actual deed records and confirm who legally owned the ground under that bridge. I did, not intentionally, not at first. I had the property surveyed because I'm an engineer, and I always survey land I buy. I asked my surveyor, a meticulous man named Boyd Holcomb, to walk every inch of the boundary. Boyd came back 2 weeks later with his field notes, his GPS coordinates, and a very particular look on his face. "Garrett," he said, "you own the bridge." I stared at him for a second. Then I said, "Say that again." He said it again. And that's when everything changed. I didn't react. That's the first thing I want to say. I didn't run over to Richmond Estates and wave a deed in anyone's face. I didn't call a lawyer yet. I went home, spread the survey maps across my kitchen table, poured myself a cup of black coffee, and spent 4 hours reading every page of that 7-page title description. Boyd was right. The bridge, including the concrete structure, the land beneath it, and a 1-2-oat buffer on both sides, sat entirely within the bounds of the old Bellamy Ranch parcel. It was right there in the 1941 deed. Calvin's grandfather had built it, owned it, and never conveyed it to anyone. When the estate sold the land to me, that bridge came with it, clean and unencumbered. No easement on file, no recorded agreement, nothing. I wasn't sure what to do with that information yet, so I filed it away and drove out to the property to start walking. 10. HOA Land. That's when I met Diane Pard. It was a Tuesday morning in late April. I turned off the county road onto the farm lane that ran along the Bellamy property, following it toward the river, where I planned to check the condition of some old fence lines. The lane passed within 100 yards of the bridge approach, my approach, though I didn't know enough yet to think of it that way. I wasn't crossing the bridge. I wasn't going anywhere near Richmond Estates. I was just driving on my own land. A white Mercedes SUV appeared in my rear-view mirror about 30 seconds later, moving fast. It pulled up alongside me on the wide gravel lane and stopped, and the window came down and there was Diane Pard. She was maybe 55, well-dressed for 9 in the morning, full makeup, a pressed blouse, a lanyard with a laminated card that said Ridgemont Estates HO, a president, like she was working a trade show. Her hair was a helmet of highlighted blonde that had seen a professional 3 days earlier. She had the energy of someone who had been waiting all week to be annoyed by something. "You're on restricted property," she said. I told her, "I own this land. This is the Ridgemont Estates access corridor, residents only." I explained I was not a Ridgemont resident. I was the owner of the Bellamy Ranch parcel. The land she was parked on was mine. She looked at me the way HOA presidents look, at people who haven't read the rules, patient, condescending, slightly delighted to have caught someone wrong. "The corridor between the county road and the bridge entrance is shared community infrastructure. It's been that way for 20 years. I'm going to need you to turn around." I didn't argue. I turned around. Not because she was right. She wasn't. But because I wanted to know exactly what I was dealing with before I opened my mouth. There's a principle in engineering. Always know what's underground before you start digging. When I got home, I called my attorney. I want to tell you about that attorney, because she matters. Shelley Machin had been practicing real property law in West Tennessee for 19 years. She was whip-smart, methodical, and had a reputation for finding things in deed chains that nobody else bothered to look for. Her office smelled like old case files and cold coffee and was lined floor to ceiling with county plat books. She'd bookmarked herself. I explained the situation. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "Fax me the title description, the survey, and the closing documents. I'll call you Thursday." She called me Wednesday. She'd been up until midnight. "Garrett," she said, "the bridge is yours completely. There's no easement on file anywhere. Not county records, not state records. The HOA has been using it under an implied permissive license from the prior owner, which died with Calvin Bellamy's estate. You own it. Fee simple, all of it." I thanked her and asked what my options were. "Technically," she said, "your options are broad, but let's not do anything yet. Let's see what they do first." 3 days later, a certified letter arrived at my home address. It was from the Ridgemont Estates' HOA Board of Directors, signed by Diane Pard, and it accused me of trespassing on community property. It included a cease and desist order demanding I stop using the HOA access corridor and threatening me with a lawsuit if I crossed their bridge again. I read it twice. Then I put it in a folder labeled Exhibits and poured myself another cup of coffee. That folder would get very thick. Shell's advice was to say nothing publicly. Let them build their case on a foundation that wasn't there. I was good with that. I'd spent 26 years watching government agencies overreach because they assumed nobody would push back. The strategy for dealing with it was always the same. Be quieter than they expect. Be more prepared than they imagine, and let them make the first mistake on the record. Diane made several. The HOA held an emergency meeting in early May. I found out about it 2 days later. because a Ridgemont resident named Dale Kimmy, a retired schoolteacher who'd bought one of the corner lots 20 years ago, called me out of nowhere. He'd gotten my number from the county property records. He sounded embarrassed. "Mr. Weller," he said, "I want you to know that not everyone here agrees with what's happening. The board told us you're threatening to block the bridge and extort the neighborhood. I didn't believe it, but people are scared." I told Dale I hadn't threatened anything. I explained that I was the legal owner of the bridge, that I had the title documentation to prove it, and that I hadn't made any demand of any kind on the HOA. They had sent me a cease and desist. He went quiet for a moment. "She told us you were the one who threatened." "I've got the letter she sent me," I said. "I'll email it to you right now." He went quiet for a few days after that. Meanwhile, Diane was escalating in every direction. She contacted the county commissioner's office, claiming I was illegally impeding access to 87 homes. She filed a complaint with the county code enforcement office, alleging I had blocked a public road. Neither complaint had merit. I hadn't done anything to the bridge, hadn't touched it, hadn't blocked it. I was still parking my truck on my side and walking my property on my own. 2 feet. The code enforcement officer, a weathered man named Terrence Poole, came out to assess the situation. He spent 40 minutes with me, looked at the survey, looked at my deed, and said, "Sir, I can't issue a violation. You haven't done anything." Diane's attorney, an HOA specialist from Memphis named Bradford Clement, sent a second letter. This one escalate the language considerably. They were now claiming that Garrett Weller was engaged in tortious interference with community access rights, and that the HOA intended to pursue both injunctive relief and damages if I did not sign a written agreement acknowledging the bridge as HOA property. I want to pause here and explain something because this matters legally. There's a legal concept called a prescriptive easement. It's similar to adverse possession. The idea that if someone uses another person's land openly, continuously, and without permission for a set period of time, they can legally acquire the right to keep using it. In Tennessee, that period is 20 years. The HOA had been using that bridge for 22 years. On the surface, this sounds like their argument had merit, and Bradford Clement was going to make exactly that argument. What he didn't know, and what Shelley Macon had already researched, was the fatal flaw in the prescriptive easement theory. It requires hostile use. Not hostile in the aggressive sense, hostile in the legal sense, meaning the person using the property must be doing so without the owner's permission. The Bellamys had given permission verbally, casually, and without paperwork, but demonstrably. Multiple former Ridgemont residents remembered the arrangement. At least 2 of them, including Dale Kimsey, were willing to testify that the late Calvin Bellamy had personally told residents they were welcome to use his bridge anytime they needed. Shelley had already reached out and gotten that on record. Permissive use legally destroys a prescriptive easement claim. You can use someone's land for 100 years with their permission and acquire 0 property rights. Permission, paradoxically, was the HOA's worst enemy. I didn't tell Bradford Clement any of this. Shelley told me not to. Let them file. Let them make the argument in court. Let the record should exactly what they believed and why they were wrong. I kept walking my land. I checked my fence lines. I cleared some brush along the river. The smell of wet clay and river mud in the morning was the first thing that had felt like peace in 2 years, and I started making very quiet plans. By the time June arrived, Diane had expanded the battlefield. She posted on the Ridgemont Estates' private Facebook group. Someone screenshot it and sent it to me, claiming that an outside opportunist had fraudulently claimed ownership of the bridge and was holding the neighborhood hostage for a ransom demand. I had made no demand. I had not communicated directly with the HOA at all beyond receiving their letters. Then she called the local news station. A reporter named Kayla Brandt showed up at my property on a Thursday afternoon. She was polite, professional, a little cautious. She said she'd heard from the HOA that a land dispute was putting 87 families at risk of losing road access. Could I comment? I invited her in, made coffee, and spent 45 minutes showing her the deed, the survey, and the 2 cease and desist letters I'd received. I was calm. I spoke slowly. I let her look at the documents and photograph them. She asked, "So you own the bridge?" "According to the recorded deed and a registered survey, yes." "What do you intend to do with it?" "I intend to work something out fairly," I said. "I've always been open to that. The story ran 2 days later. Diane had declined to be interviewed on camera, which was smart of her because her written statement to the reporter was a masterpiece of overreach. She accused me of orchestrating a hostile land grab, called the sale of the Bellamy Ranch suspicious, and implied that I had known about the bridge before buying the property, and specifically purchased the land to weaponize it. I had not known, but I'll tell you something. I was starting to understand why knowing would have been reasonable. That news story opened a floodgate. My emails started filling up. Former Ridgemont residents who'd moved away, current residents furious at Diane, real estate attorneys from 3 counties who were suddenly interested in the case, and one email from a retired bridge inspector named Phil Stanger who'd done a structural assessment on what the locals called Cooper Mill Bridge, the old Bellamy crossing back in 2018. Phil's email was 3 paragraphs long. He said he'd submitted his inspection report to the HOA with a list of deficiencies. He'd recommended resurfacing the bridge deck, repointing the abutment masonry, and replacing the expansion joints at an estimated cost of $180,000. The HOA, he said, had thanked him and never followed up. I stared at that email for a long time. Then I called Shell. "Get me a current bridge inspection," I said. "Hire the best structural engineer you can find. I want to know exactly what condition that structure is in right now." Meanwhile, Diane had taken her campaign to the county commission. She appeared at a July meeting, flanked by 4 board members in Bradford Clement, and asked the county to designate the bridge as a public road, which would effectively strip me of control and force taxpayers to maintain it. The county attorney spent about 6 minutes reviewing the documents before he told the commission he couldn't recommend the designation. The bridge is on private property with no recorded easement to the county. To designate it as a public road, the county would need to acquire it through eminent domain or purchase. This commission doesn't have the budget for that, and we'd likely lose in court given the clear title chain. Diane stood up and said the county attorney was wrong. The county attorney said with impressive patience that he was welcome to read the deed. She sat down. In the parking lot afterward, Dale Kimmy found me. He looked tired, dark circles, the defeated posture of a man who'd been going to too many meetings about something he hadn't caused. "Garrett," he said, "what's it going to take to fix this?" "A fair conversation," I told him. "Not with her, with the people who actually live there." He nodded slowly. "I think a lot of us want that." The structural engineer Shelley hired was a woman named Dr. Constance Faber. She had 30 years of experience, a master's in civil engineering from Vanderbilt, and 0 patience for people who didn't maintain bridges. She spent a full day on site with her team, ground-penetrating radar, core sample drills, underwater inspection equipment. I was there in the morning and watched her work from a respectful distance. The smell of the river that day was metallic and green. August in West Tennessee. The kickers were deafening, and the heat came off the water in visible waves. Dr. Faber crawled around under that bridge and waders like it was nothing. Her report landed in my email 4 days later, and it was not good news for Ridgemont Estates. Beyond what Phil Stanger had flagged in 2018, the bridge had developed additional issues. The expansion joint seals were now fully degraded, allowing water infiltration. 2 of the 3 concrete abutment sections showed active cracking and signs of rebar corrosion. The bridge deck itself had surface deterioration that had reached the underlying concrete in 3 locations. The load rating certified at H20 in 1993 had not been formally re-certified since. Given current deterioration, Dr. Faber was not comfortable certifying that rating is still valid. In plain language, 87 families had been driving heavy vehicles, trucks, SUVs, moving vans, concrete mixers, landscaping equipment across a bridge whose legal load certification was effectively expired and whose structural condition had been declining for at least 6 years while the HOA did nothing. Here's the legal piece that really matters. In Tennessee, a private bridge owner has a duty of care to people who are lawfully crossing it. If someone is hurt because a bridge owner knew of a structural deficiency and failed to address it, liability falls on the owner. The HOA had Phil Stanger's 2018 report. They had notice, they had done nothing, and now the bridge wasn't theirs anyway. That meant the liability sat with the actual owner, which was me. Shelley explained it clearly. "Garrett, you need to act on this structural report. If you don't and something happens on that bridge, you are exposed. I understood, and that changed everything about the timing. This wasn't just a property dispute anymore. It was a safety issue, a real one. And I wasn't going to sit on a deteriorating bridge for 2 years while lawyers argued about easement law. Here's what Diane had been spectacularly wrong about from the beginning. She thought I was some opportunistic land speculator who'd sniffed out a vulnerability and was going to squeeze the neighborhood for everything I could get. I was a road engineer. I had spent my career building and maintaining infrastructure so people could get to work, get home, get their kids to school safely. I was not going to let 87 families drive across a structurally compromised bridge, one more day longer than necessary. But I also wasn't going to hand over my legal rights because someone made a mistake and then tried to bully me into cleaning it up for free. What I was going to do was make an offer, a real one, a fair one, with real terms that protected the safety of the bridge, the residents, and my own liability exposure. And I was going to make it on my terms in a room where everyone could hear it. September in that part of Tennessee has a particular quality. The air cools just enough night that you can smell the hickory coming back to life. I've been spending more time at the property, clearing a campsite near the river, hauling in some basic equipment. The quietness of the place was doing something for me that I couldn't quite name. But I was also working. Shelley and I met twice a week through September. The first thing we did was assemble the ownership package. Every document establishing my title to the bridge, organized, Bates-stamped, and duplicated in 3 sets. A county-recorded deed, Boyd Howcom's registered survey with GPS coordinates, confirming the bridge footprint fell within my parcel. Dr. Faber's structural inspection report, Phil Stanger's 2018 report obtained by request, every certified letter I'd received from the HOA, all of it in 3-in binders with color-coded tabs. Then we did the legal research. In Tennessee, a private landowner can grant or deny access across their property. They can charge a fee for that access. A formal recorded easement is the standard mechanism, a legal document filed with the county register that permanently attaches a right of access to one parcel in favor of another. It specifies the terms and runs with the land, meaning, even if the property sells, the easement stays. That's the key distinction between what the Bellamys had allowed informally and revocably, and what these 87 families needed going forward. Something written, recorded, and permanent. Shelley drafted the easement offer. It was designed to be defensible, reasonable, and permanent. Annual easement fee, $12,000 per year, paid quarterly, adjusted for CPI annually. The easement covered vehicular and pedestrian access across the bridge for Ridgemont Estates residents and their guests. It required the HOA to fund the $180,000 structural repair within 18 months and to maintain the bridge thereafter at their expense. And it contained a clause: if maintenance fell below the standard established by Dr. Faber's inspection, I retain the right to close the bridge for safety repairs. I want to be clear about that $12,000 figure. It works out to about $137 per home per year, less than $12 a month per household, for the permanent legal right to cross the bridge to access your home. That is not extortion. That's less than a streaming subscription. I also contacted a state DOT engineer I'd worked with for years, a man named Frank Diacroy, and asked him informally what a bridge in the condition described by Dr. Faber's report would be rated under the federal inspection program. Frank said off the record that a structure with those deficiencies would likely be posted with a reduced load limit if it were on a public road, and that a competent bridge owner's first obligation was to address the known deficiencies before someone got hurt. That was the piece I needed to hear. I sent the HOA through Shelley, a formal notice under Tennessee property law. I was the owner of the bridge. I was aware of structural deficiencies documented by a licensed structural engineer. Out of an abundance of caution for public safety, I intended to post the bridge with a 3-ton weight restriction effective in 60 days, pending completion of easement negotiations. The restriction was legal, documented, and necessary. It wasn't a bluff. Dr. Faber had signed off on the recommendation. 3 tons is enough for a passenger car. It is not enough for a moving van. It is not enough for a fire truck. That last part got the immediate attention of 23 Ridgemont residents who called Dale Kimmy within 48 hours. Then I reached out to 4 Ridgemont homeowners who'd been quietly in my corner since the news story ran. One of them, a woman named Bev Coulter, 16 years in Ridgemont, on the HOA's architectural committee, done with Diane in every possible way, had been sending me screenshots of the private Facebook group for weeks. Bev asked if she could help me request a formal HOA membership meeting. Under Tennessee HOA law, any vote on a capital expenditure over $25,000 requires approval by a majority of the membership, not just the board. $180,000 bridge repair qualified. Bev, Dale, and 2 other homeowners submitted the formal written request. The board was required by their own bylaws to schedule it within 45 days. Diane had no choice but to put it on the calendar. I polished my presentation, printed the binders, called Dr. Binders, called Dr. Binders, called Dr. Faber, and asked if she'd appear. She said yes with the comfortable contempt of a professional who had been waiting years to explain to someone why you don't defer bridge maintenance. I was ready. The meeting was set for October 14th. The moment it went out on the HOA calendar, things started moving fast. Bradford Clement filed the adverse possession lawsuit the week before. I'd expected it. Shelley had expected it. Shelley had expected it. The filing claimed that Ridgemont Estates' HOA had used the bridge openly, notoriously exclusively, continuously, and hostily for more than 20 years, satisfying Tennessee's 20-year adverse possession standard, and therefore had acquired legal title to the structure by operation of law. The problem, of course, was that word hostily, and it was Shell's favorite part of the entire case. She filed the response in 4 days. Attached to it were 3 sworn affidavits from Dale Kimsey, from Bev Coulter, and from a former resident named John Stafford, who'd moved to Florida in 2012. All 3 stated they had personally heard Calvin Bellamy tell residents they were welcome to use his bridge. All 3 described the relationship as friendly and neighborly. None described any conflict over bridge access during Bellamy's lifetime. Permissive use, not hostile use. Adverse possession defeated before it left. The starting line. You can use someone's land for 100 years, with the owner's blessing, and at the end of it you own nothing. You didn't own at the beginning. Permission is the gift that keeps on giving to the property owner. Bradford Clement responded with a supplemental brief arguing that neighborly permission from a deceased private individual was insufficient to establish a binding permissive license. Shelley responded that permissive use negates the hostility element, regardless of whether the permission was formally recorded. She cited 6 Tennessee cases. He had no good answer. Legal back and forth aside, the lawsuit served Diane's real purpose. It scared people. The Ridgemont Facebook group was in full crisis mode. People were posting their alternate route options. Google Maps showed the detour. If the bridge were closed, residents would face a 3-minute drive around the river bend on county roads, 43 extra minutes to get a kid to school, 43 extra minutes for an ambulance. Diane appeared in the group every day, framing the lawsuit as a noble battle against a hostile outsider. She said Bradford Clement was the best in the state. She said anyone who attended Garrett Weller's illegal presentation on October 14th was undermining the community. On October 12th, 2 days before the meeting, someone flattened 2 of my truck tires on the gravel parking area, near the bridge approach. I didn't have clear proof of who did it. I filed a police report. I had trail cameras out there, but the angle hadn't captured the vehicle cleanly. I documented everything as I always did, and I didn't let it change my posture. What it did do was give Bev Coulter a new target for her outrage. She posted in the HOA group, pointedly, without naming names, but everyone understood that she was disgusted by whoever had vandalized a man's property, and that it was exactly the kind of behavior that ten's gotten us into this mess. 14 residents liked the post within an hour. October 13th, the night before the meeting. Diane called an off-the-books information session at the clubhouse for concerned homeowners. About 30 people showed up. She told them Garrett Weller was an engineer, turned extortionist planning to close the bridge indefinitely and leave the neighborhood landlocked. She said the easement fee was $20,000 a year. She called Dr. Faber's report fabricated. Dale Kimsey, who attended and sat in the back with his phone recording, sent me the audio that night. I listened to it once, then I added it to the binder. The morning of October 14th, I drove out early. I parked on my side of the bridge, walked the property once in the early mist, listened to the river. A great blue heron stood motionless in the shallows about 30 yards upstream. The air smelled like cold mud and wood smoke drifting from somewhere far off. I thought about Carol. I thought about the quiet she'd always wanted for us. This wasn't quite what she'd imagined, but standing there watching that heron in the October light, I thought she might have understood what I was doing. Then I got my binder, got in my truck, and drove to the Ridgemont Estates' clubhouse. The clubhouse parking lot was full. I counted 68 cars. The building was low and beige, with a covered patio and a recently resealed parking lot. New black top smell hitting you from 20 feet out. A folding table sat at the door with a sign-in sheet. A woman I didn't recognize was manning it. She looked at my name and started to say something, then stopped. Beef Coulter appeared at my elbow. "Garrett, come on in." Diane was at the front of the room behind a folding table with Bradford Clement and 2 HOA board members. She was wearing a blazer and had a prepared packet in front of her. When she saw me walk in, something moved behind her eyes. Not fear. Hi, exactly. More like calculation. I found a seat near the back. Dr. Faber was already there in a blazer of her own, her report in a hard case beside her. The meeting was called to order at 7 o'clock by the HOA secretary, a quiet man named Taryn Wall, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. The formal agenda item was approval of capital expenditure for bridge structural repair, but everyone in the room understood. It was really about the bridge, the easement, and me. Diane took the floor first. She spent 15 minutes telling the room that Bradford Clement's lawsuit was proceeding on strong legal grounds, that the easement offer was unacceptable and possibly fraudulent, and that the membership should reject any negotiation and stand unified behind the board. She showed a slideshow. One of the slides had a photo of me from the news story with the caption, "Outside Threat." I noted that the caption was misspelled. Bradford Clement spoke next, outlining the adverse possession argument. He was smooth, professionally vague in the ways you can be when your core argument is shaky. Then Bev Coulter raised her hand and invoked her right as a member to respond under Tennessee HOA law. Diane tried to object. The secretary quietly told her she couldn't. Bev stood up and said, "I want to hear from the man who owns the bridge. That's why we're here." The room got very still. Dale Kimsey seconded it from the other side of the room, loudly. About 40 people turned toward me. I walked to the front. I set up the projector. I'd brought my own and I put the deed on screen. Not a copy. The county recorded original scanned at 300 dpi, every word legible. "This is the deed," I said. "Recorded in Haywood County on March 7th of this year. This is the meets and bounds description of the property I purchased." I zoomed into the relevant section. "This is the language that includes the bridge star. Uxure. The coordinates in this description were confirmed by a registered surveyor. Every one of you can have a printed copy tonight." The room was absolutely quiet. Then I put Dr. Faber's inspection report on screen. I walked through it slowly, not to scare anyone, but because they deserved to know what they'd been crossing. "The bridge needs repair," I said. "Somebody should have addressed this years ago. That's not your fault individually, but it's where we are." I put up the easement offer. I walked through each term: the annual fee, the repair obligation, the maintenance, standard. $12,000 a year paid quarterly works out to about $11 per home per month. The repair cost is $180, and your HOA reserve fund currently sits at $212,000. This is completely solvable tonight. And then I said one more thing. I also need you to change your board leadership. I'm not going to negotiate a permanent easement with someone who had my tires flattened 2 nights ago. Nobody moved. Then a man in a blue sweater near the window said, "How do you know it was her?" "I don't," I said. "I just know I'm not negotiating with her. That's my condition." Diane stood up. "This is extortion." "Pshaw." Diane stood up. "This is extortion. This is criminal extortion, and I demand." Bev Coulter's voice cut right through the room. "Diane, sit down." And Diane sat down. The vote was called. It was not close. 7-1-6. That was the final tally when the membership voted to accept the easement terms. The room counted the hands twice. The secretary was meticulous, and when the second count matched the first, the meeting fell into the particular silence that happens when something is finally completely over. 60 days. That's all it had taken from the day Shelley sent the formal weight restriction notice to the day 71 Ridgemont homeowners raised their hands and decided they'd rather write a check than go to war with a man holding a valid deed and a structural engine res report, 60 days from threat to resolution, because the facts were never actually in dispute. Only Diane's willingness to look at them had been. Diane stood up and said, "The vote was invalid." The secretary said quietly, "Diane, I followed the bylaws exactly. The vote is valid." She said Bradford Clement would file for an injunction. Bradford Clement, to his credit as a lawyer, if not as an advocate for Diane specifically, cleared his throat and said, "Mrs. Pard, I should advise you that given the affidavit filed last week, the adverse possession claim faces significant headwinds, and pursuing an injunction without a stronger underlying. Then fight harder," she said. He looked at his briefcase. "I'll send you my invoice for today. That's the moment I'll remember. Not some dramatic outburst, just a lawyer reaching for his briefcase." 4 days after the meeting at a follow-up board session that Diane no longer controlled, because the membership had voted simultaneously to initiate a board recall, a new interim board was seated. Dale Kimsey was voted interim president. Bev Coulter became treasurer. A retired insurance adjuster named William Puit took over as secretary. The new board contacted Shell the same week. They signed the easement agreement on November 3rd, 6 weeks after the membership vote. The document was recorded in Haywood County on November 8th. I watched Shelley hand it over the counter to the Register of Deeds, and I felt something quietly settle in my chest. The kind of settling that comes when something that should have been resolved a long time ago finally gets resolved. Diane filed 2 more motions through Bradford Clement. One was for a temporary restraining order against the easement going into effect. The judge denied it in 48 hours. The second was an appeal of the membership vote claiming procedural irregularity. The HOA's own long-standing retainer-retainer-ator. Ney reviewed the bylaws and wrote a letter to Diane's counsel saying there was no procedural basis for the appeal. Clement's invoices stopped arriving about 6 weeks later. Dr. Faber oversaw the structural repairs personally. The HOA hired a bridge contractor out of Jackson who knew the work well. The crew was on site by February. The bridge was closed for 23 days during the most intensive phase of the repair. Most residents used the alternate route without complaint. A few of them, more than I'd expected, stopped me on the road or sent emails to thank me for being reasonable. The contractor found something during the deck work that nobody had anticipated. A section of the original 1941 concrete, poured by Calvin Bellamy's grandfather, that was still in essentially perfect condition. Good aggregate, good mix design, properly cured, 83 years old, and still holding. The contractor showed it to me and said, "They don't make it like this anymore." "No," I said, "they don't." When the bridge reopened in March, it was load-rated and certified for H25, stronger than its original certification. Dr. Stocker, than its original certification. Dr. Faber signed the inspection report. The county road engineer's office was notified. Everything was properly on file. The morning it reopened, I was there, just standing on my side of the river in the early light, watching the first few cars cross. A woman in a minivan, a man in a work truck, and then a school bus, which was what I'd specifically wanted to see, because fire trucks and school buses were what had worried me most about the deteriorating load rating. The bus crossed easy and clean, and I drove home. The conservation easement closed in June. 2,000 acres of hardwood bottomland along the Hatchie River bend, protected in perpetuity. No subdivision, no commercial clearing, no development of any kind, just river bottom native timber, migratory waterfowl, and the kind of deep, unhurried sea. Lengths that Calvin Bellamy's grandfather understood when he mixed that first batch of concrete in 1941. The West Tennessee Land Trust's executive director, a woman named Patricia Hensley, called it one of the most significant conservation transactions in Haywood County in 20 years. Her team planted a stand of bald cypress along the river corridor as part of the management plan. Cypress takes decades to fully establish, but it's the right tree for that ground. It roots deep, it survives floods, and once it settles in, almost nothing can kill it. I liked the metaphor more than I expected to. I also did something else with the $12,000 a year coming in from the bridge easement. I set up a scholarship fund through the Haywood County Community Foundation. 50% of the annual easement income, $6,000 a year, goes toward 2 annual scholarships for local high school students pursuing degrees in civil engineering, environmental science, or land management. The fund is named for Carol. I didn't announce it publicly. Shelley found out through the foundation's newsletter and called to say something kind about it. I thanked her, and then she sent me her final invoice, which was considerable, and I paid it without complaint. She had earned every dollar. Dale Kimsey called in July. The new HOA board had settled into its rhythm. The bridge maintenance schedule was on a proper 5-year plan. The reserve fund was being rebuilt responsibly. He said the neighborhood felt different, quieter, which he meant as the highest possible compliment. Quieter. How? I asked. Nobody's getting cease and desist letters, he said. Diane Pard filed a personal lawsuit against me in August, alleging defamation and intentional interference with her HOA president duties. Her new attorney, not Bradford Clement this time, someone else sent a demand letter. Shelley reviewed it and wrote a 4-page response, walking that rough every public statement I had ever made about Diane, demonstrating that each one was either directly sourced from documents or clearly framed as my personal interpretation of events, and concluding that the lawsuit had no factual basis and would result in a fee-shifting award under Tennessee's anti-SLAPP statute if pursued. The lawsuit was withdrawn in October. I haven't heard from Diane since. My cabin is done now. Nothing fancy, a timber frame structure on a gentle rise about a 1/4 mile from the river with a covered porch that faces east, so you get the morning light. There's a wood stove, a good kitchen, and a fly-tying bench near the window that overlooks the Hickory Ridge. Boyd Holcomb helped me pick the site because of course he did. The first weekend I stayed there, I sat on that porch in the early morning with a cup of coffee and watched the mist come off the river. For the first time in a long time, there was nothing pressing. No meetings, no certified letters, no structural reports to read. Just the creek sound and the birds waking up in the October chill, settling into the wood of the porch rail under my hands. I thought about Carol, about how she would have loved it out here. I think she'd have had a garden going by now. Tomatoes for certain. Maybe some pies along the south wall where the afternoon sun would catch them just right. I thought about the bridge, about 83 years of weight crossing those spans. Farm equipment, cattle trucks, school buses, station wagons, minivans, ambulances, all of it held up by a concrete foundation that one man poured by hand because he needed to get from one side of a river to the other. All that crossing, all those lives going back and forth. There's something in that worth honoring. You take care of the things that hold people up. That's true, whether you're talking about a bridge, or a community, or a marriage, or any angels that people rely on without thinking about it too hard. Whoever built that bridge understood that, and now it's sound again, load-rated certified, and good for another 50 years at least. I'm good with that. If any of this sounds familiar, if you've dealt with an HOA that treated your property like theirs or fought a battle they were sure you'd lose, drop your story in the comments below. And if this is your first time here, hit subscribe. I've got more stories where this one came from, and I promise they don't disappoint. Here's what this story really comes down to. Danny Paula has been president of HOA for 9 years, and in 9 years, nobody has ever checked her work. Nobody had ever gone to the Cal record office and confirmed that the things she claimed was hers actually were. She assumed, the original developer assumed 87 families. Assumed, and 22 years of assumption created a paper fortress with absolutely nothing behind it. What Garrett had and what eventually ended the whole thing was an anger or aggression, as was a Dick, a survey, a structural engineer and patient. He let her build the case against herself. He let the records filled up with her own certified letters and Facebook calls and caring commission appearances, and when the moment finally came, he didn't yell or tweet it. He walked into a room with a projector and showed the truth calmly to the people who needs to see it. That's how you win when the sedum is working, and how you fix this when someone is abusing their position inside a sedum. Preparation, documentation, and knowing your rights are not glamorous, but they are consistently what wins. If you ever deal with a neighborhood authority figure who treats your property like this, drop your story in the comments. I want to hear it, and if this is your first time here, hit subscribe because the next story involves a carrying roast, a dispute fan L.I.F., and a retired surveyor who has been waiting 30 years to you, one very specific document, You don't want to miss this.